Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, B'cha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of First Esdras, the second chapter. And as the continuation from the first chapter, as we went through, the first chapter was mainly a recap leading up to from the point of Josiah up until the Babylonians, up until the time of the Persians. Okay, and so in the second chapter, it goes into a bit of that history. Now, mind you, at this point in time, we're still at that, I'd say, a little bit before what scholars call the intertestamental period, which majority of that is, in the book of Maccabees, like in those kinds of books, because that's mainly when you had the Greeks ruling, and when you read in the Old Testament, you'll notice that the Old Testament books, in terms of timeline wise, they really carry on all the way up until, the Persians, right? The Persian rulership. And then the New Testament, it picks up when the Romans are in rulership. All right, so that intertestamental period, as they call it, in secular history, that was mainly when the Greeks were ruling. Now you have certain books and chapters like Daniel 11 that is mainly prophetic, but it was prophesying concerning that intertestamental period between the time of the Greeks ruling. Okay, but where we're at right now, we're dealing with the Persians, okay, in particular Cyrus. So this is First Esdras Chapter 2, verse 1. And at this point in time, at least in the timeline that is being described in First Esdras Chapter 2, with the Persians coming into power, I believe at this time Daniel is alive, and of course Ezra, because he's writing this, and a few other contemporaries, but right now those are the main two that came off the top of my head. So verse 1, it says, "In the first year of Cyrus, king of the Persians, that the word of the Lord might be accomplished, that he had promised by the mouth of Jeremy," which is Jeremiah, "the Lord raised up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of the Persians, and he made a proclamation through all his kingdom, and also by writing." Now, this time where it's going into this proclamation that he made, which I'm going to read, I believe this should be somewhere around 539 BC or so, which is right after the Persians take down the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So continuing, saying, "Thus saith Cyrus, king of the Persians, the Lord of Israel, the Most High Lord, hath made me king of the whole world, and commanded me to build him an house at Jerusalem in Jewry. If therefore there be any of you that are of his people," and who would those be? Those be the Israelites, right? "Let the Lord, even his Lord, be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem that is in Judea, and build the house of the Lord of Israel, for he is the Lord that dwelleth in Jerusalem." Now, what Cyrus is referring to here, or actually what he is actually doing here, this was prophesied, right? Let's go real quick. This is prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, and I believe Isaiah 44 in the last verse leading into the 45th chapter. And this Cyrus was prophesied to do this and mentioned by name. Now, for a bit more context, if we look up Isaiah, the prophet, he lived, I'd say, at least 100 years or so before this proclamation by Cyrus, right? So let's look at the timeline they give him. Okay, so it says here, the text of the book of Isaiah refers to Isaiah the prophet, but the exact relationship between the book of Isaiah and the actual prophet Isaiah is complicated. The traditional view is that all 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah were written by one man, Isaiah, possibly in two periods between 740 BC and 686 BC, separated by approximately 15 years. Nevertheless, they place him around the the 8th century, okay, which the 8th century is the 700s, from 799 all the way to 700. That's the 8th century, okay, because once you go past 700, you're no longer, you know, in the 7th century, right? You're now 700 and something, which is within the 8th century. And always remember that in BC, time counts downward as you go into the future. Okay, so if we put Isaiah's time, even here, right, even if it's saying between 740 BC and 686, the time that Cyrus is making this declaration is somewhere around 539. Okay, so that's still well over 100 years. You know, that this prophecy that Isaiah had you know, made came to pass. So let's read that. This is Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28. Let me see. Actually, let me actually start at 26. It says that confirmeth the word of his servant. Now this is Isaiah talking about the Most High. The Most High is the one that confirms the word of his servant, and performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah, ye shall be built, and I shall raise up the decayed places thereof. So really, Isaiah is prophesying here about the rebuilding of Jerusalem even before it was destroyed. That saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That and you can see why sometimes these messages would go over the heads, you know, of the people, because imagine you're in Isaiah's time and you're like, why are you talking about Jerusalem being inhabited and the cities of Judah being built? It's already built. We're living in it right now. What decayed places are you referring to? Verse 28, that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid. And that's exactly what Cyrus is saying here in 1 Esdras chapter 2. Now let's move on to chapter 45, Isaiah 45 and 1. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. So one thing to point out here is, don't get thrown off because you're seeing the word anointed here when the Most High is referring to Cyrus. Cyrus is not an Israelite. Cyrus is a heathen. We're reading here that he is a Persian. Cyrus is not getting special treatment, you know, because he is being called the anointed here. Okay, now I want to look up not Cyrus, but the word anointed. And we have in the Hebrew here, Mashayach. It says anointed, anointed one of Cyrus, of the high priest, of the Messiah. It says here, usually a consecrated person, specifically the Messiah. And the whole concept here is that the Lord is saying Cyrus was chosen, right? Meaning the Lord chose Cyrus to do this job. That's why he is referring to him here as his anointed, okay, whose right hand I have holden, meaning the Lord selected Cyrus, which at this point in time wasn't even born yet. So can you imagine those that are hearing this wondering, who the hell is Cyrus? All right. But anyway, the Lord appointed Cyrus to be the one who would make this decree for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. And that's why the Lord allowed Cyrus to rise up in power and subdue all those other nations under him, take down the Babylonians, so that he can fulfill this role or this prophecy concerning him. Okay, so going back to 1 Esdras chapter 2 and reading again what Cyrus is saying, right? The Lord raised up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of the Persians, and he made proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also by writing, saying, and we're going to get to that writing part, saying, "Thus saith Cyrus, king of the Persians, the Lord of Israel," keyword Israel, "the Most High Lord hath made me king of the whole world." And we read the Lord said that he would, basically loosen the loins of kings before Cyrus, and commanded me to build him an house at Jerusalem in Jewry. Now, that writing here, there's actually something known as the Cyrus cylinder. And we can look into that because there are different archaeological findings that do back up different events that we read about happening in the scriptures. Okay, now it says the Cyrus cylinder is an ancient clay cylinder, now broken into several pieces, on which is written an Achaemenid royal inscription in Akkadian cuneiform. And cuneiform is basically this form of writing here that you can see, where they use these symbols to, represent, or actually, I think it's actually just like the etching of of these characters into like clay, or as you can see here, these walls and so on. And as you can see, it says cuneiform is a logo-syllabic writing system that was used to write several languages in the ancient Near East. The script was in active use from the early Bronze Age and until the beginning of the Common Era. Cuneiform scripts are marked by and named for the characteristic wedge-shaped impressions, which form their signs. Cuneiform is the earliest known writing system and was originally developed to write the Sumerian language of southern Mesopotamia. So going back to what we were reading about the Cyrus cylinder, and you can read more about cuneiform if you're interested. It says here, script in the name of the Persian king Cyrus the Great. It dates from the 6th century BC and was discovered in the ruins of the ancient Mesopotamian city of Babylon, now modern-day Iraq, in 1879. Cool, good stuff. It is currently in the possession of the British Museum. It was created and used as a foundational deposit following the Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BC, while the Neo-Babylonian Empire was invaded by Cyrus and incorporated into his Persian Empire. Now, the main part I want to read here is pertaining to this. The cylinder's text has traditionally been seen by biblical scholars as corroborative evidence of Cyrus's policy of the repatriation of the Jewish people, meaning basically allowing them to go back to their land, following their Babylonian captivity. And that's what we're reading, right? And we're going to continue to read in 1 Esdras, the 2nd chapter. An act that the book of Ezra attributes to Cyrus. And something to call out here is 1 Esdras and Ezra that you read in the not in the Apocrypha, but in just the regular Old Testament. There are a lot of parallels in there, right? The accounts you read in Ezra are also written in 1 Esdras. Ezra and Esdras are the same people or the same person. As the text refers to the restoration of cult sanctuaries and repatriation of deported peoples. This interpretation has been disputed, as the text identifies only Mesopotamian sanctuaries and makes no mention of Jews, Jerusalem, or Judea. Nonetheless, it has been seen as a sign of Cyrus's relative enlightened approach towards cultural and religious diversity. And the reason is, especially in today's day and age, a lot of these historians, scholars, and whatnot, they're mainly carnally driven, meaning that when they find these things, they want to see it says exactly this before we can acknowledge that that's what it's talking about. Okay, but you can think of it like this, right? Today, you may have some conversations that go on behind closed doors, and I mean like on a governmental level, right? And maybe it stems from some goal or endpoints that they're trying to reach, right? But when the president actually comes out and signs an executive order, the executive order is not always detailed, like at least on the high level as to what the entirety of the goal is supposed to be. Like some of these executive orders are, they're broad so that they can encapsulate a lot of things in them. So you can imagine reading about an executive order and thinking that just because of the headline of the order, it means this. But you find out later on that because of that same executive order, there's a lot more to it, than you originally thought. And the point that I'm making here is that, officially on this cylinder, based on what Cyrus wrote, it might not have been specific, as they're saying here, no mention of Jews or Jerusalem or Judea. It might not have specifically been on that cylinder, hey, the Jews in Jerusalem, go back and build a temple or the Jews in Babylon, go back and build the temple in Jerusalem. But the language on this cylinder is general, all right, allowing for us to still go back and rebuild the temple. However, the Jews were not the only ones that this applied to. That's why it's more general, you see. But they'll go back and forth and try to dispute this. However, the proof is still there. Nonetheless, it has been seen as a sign of Cyrus's relatively enlightened approach towards cultural and religious diversity. Cool. So there's that on the Cyrus cylinder. You can read more about it if you're interested. But let's go back to First Esdras chapter 2. So where we left off was let's read verse 5. Verse 5, it says, "And if therefore there be any of you that are of his people, let the Lord, even his Lord, be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem that is in Judea, and build the house of the Lord of Israel, for he is the Lord that dwelleth in Jerusalem." And remember, at this point in time, Jerusalem has been destroyed. The walls have been broken down. The temple has been burnt. Okay, because that's what the Babylonians did. But now we're going back to rebuild it. "Whosoever then dwell in the places about, let him help him. Those I say that are his neighbors, with gold and with silver, with gifts, with horses and with cattle, and other things which have been set forth by vow for the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem." So basically the neighboring regions were to help us with whatever resources we needed in the building of the temple. "Then the chief of the families of Judea and of the tribe of Benjamin stood up, the priests also and the Levites, and all they whose mind the Lord had moved to go up and to build an house for the Lord at Jerusalem." And it's important to keep in mind that we had been in Babylon for some time now. And you had Israelites that eventually started to, have lives. They started to make a living over there in Babylon. It's not like we were in chattel slavery, shackled up over there. So you had Israelites that had houses, they had wives, and they had all of that. They had a life. And so it was some of them that were, willing to say, you know what, we need to put all this to the side and go back to our actual homeland and build up build up our land. And it's kind of like today, you have Israelites today that want to stay here in America, even though this Babylon is not our rest, but they want to make it their rest. They don't want to go back. Well, you had the same thing back then. You had some Israelites that did not want to go back to Jerusalem. And in their minds, they're thinking, what is over there for me? Everything is destroyed. But I got a house over here. I got a job. I got all that stuff. I'm good. I don't want to go back and build. And quite frankly, not all of them had their heart set to the Lord, fully to where they wanted to do this. So that's why it says here, those the Lord had moved to go up and to build an house for the Lord at Jerusalem. And they that dwelt round about them, and helped them in all things with silver and gold, with horses and cattle, and with very many free gifts of a great number, whose minds were stirred up thereto. King Cyrus also brought forth the holy vessels which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and is set up in his temple of idols. Now when Cyrus, king of the Persians, had brought them forth, he delivered them to Mithridates, his treasurer. And by him they were delivered to Sennacherib, the governor of Judea. Now I believe when you look him up, when you read this in the book of Ezra in the Old Testament, his name is Sheshbazzar, but he was I think he was the first appointed governor of Judah or of Jerusalem, because remember at this point we weren't dealing with kings anymore, right? The last situation with that started with Josiah and then passed on down to his sons and then eventually Zedekiah, and then that was it, right? Jerusalem got destroyed, so there was that. And we never really had, and when I say this, I mean in a political level, kings anymore, right? Because from this point on down, all the way, we had high priests, we had, as you can see here, governors, but that kingdom like we did during the time of King David, King Solomon, King Hezekiah and all of that was no more. Verse 13, and this was the number of them: 1,000 gold cups and 1,000 of silver, censers of silver 29, vials of gold 30, and of silver 2,410, and 1,000 other vessels. So all the vessels of gold and of silver which were carried away were 5,469. That's 5,469. These were brought back by Sennacherib, together with them of the captivity from Babylon to Jerusalem. But in the time of Artaxerxes, so now remember, this is like a recap here that's happening. So when Cyrus came into power, he allowed us to go back. He gave us the resources, the permission, and the vessels, and we went back. And as we went back, between verse 15 and 16, some time has passed now. And within that time, we've started doing some rebuilding. We've laid the foundation of the temple and all of that. But in verse 16, Cyrus is no longer the king. Cyrus is dead. So verse 16, when it mentions Artaxerxes, this is referring to Cambyses II, which is the king who succeeded Cyrus, and that was his son. Okay, if we go up, see if it actually links us to Cyrus somewhere here. Cyrus the Great, there you go. And if we look at his successor, it was Cambyses II. That was his son. Okay, and that's who is being referred to here as Artaxerxes. And as we're about to read, during his time, the building of the temple was then halted. Right, so it says here, but in the time of Artaxerxes, king of the Persians, Belimus and Mithridates and Tabalius and Rathamus and Beeltethmus and Semelius the secretary, with others that were in commission with them, dwelling in Samaria and other places, wrote unto him against them that dwell in Judea and Jerusalem these letters following. So these people, these names that were mentioned, these were people who, like it says, they were dwelling in Samaria and these other neighboring places. But keep in mind that with the Persians in rule, these Judea, Samaria, these are now provinces under control of the Persian Empire, and they have governors or people in who've been appointed to basically oversee those different areas. So these people were in some form of a position to where they could influence the king based on this report they're trying to give, or at least that they gave. To King Artaxerxes our Lord, thy servants Rathamus the story writer, which the story writer means he was a recorder, so he was recording these events that were taking place, and Semelius the scribe, and the rest of their council, and the judges that are in Seleucia and Phoenice. Seleucia here is Coal Syria, which is, in the Hebrew, is Kal Syria, which is all Syria. And it's really that region of, mainly the Levant, right? So if you look at, let's just type Seleucia. There we go, Coal Syria. And if we take a look here, So you can see here they have it from, I'd say, somewhere borderline, east of Syria, all the way on down here. Okay, and you can see here you have Phoenicia, which when it says Phoenice is referring to Phoenicia. Okay, and then you have Palestine down here, and so on and so forth. So it says here, be it now known to the king, to the Lord King, that the Jews that are come up from you to us, being come into Jerusalem, that rebellious and wicked city, do build the marketplaces and repair the walls of it, and do lay the foundation of the temple. Now if this city and the walls thereof be made up again, they will not only refuse to give tribute, but also rebel against kings. So they were pretty much bringing up an evil report against us to try and hinder us from building. Okay, and this is also mentioned in because it didn't stop just here, right? They tried to hinder us in building the temple, and the same thing happened during the time of Nehemiah when we were building the walls, and that's mentioned in Daniel the 9th chapter. All right, that we shall, the walls shall be built even in troublous times. Those troublous times was because we were being troubled when trying to actually rebuild, and this is an example of what they were doing. Verse 20. And for as much as as the things pertaining to the temple are now in hand, we think it meet not to neglect such a matter. So pretty much, like they've already laid the foundation. Like we thought that, hey, knowing the history of these people, it's best that we speak about it now. But to speak unto the Lord the King, unto our Lord the King, to the intent that if it be thy pleasure, it may be sought out in the books of thy fathers. And thou shalt find in the chronicles what is written concerning these kings, and shall understand that that city was rebellious, troubling both kings and cities. So they were basically asking Cambyses to check the records and find out the history about these people, and you'll see what we're talking about here. And the history of us was known. Remember that, like, even in the Bible, which is history from the perspective of Israelites, there are mentions of what these other nations are doing. Well, it also works vice versa. When we're in rulership and we're doing these things, be it being at war with a certain kingdom, or, for example, in the time of King David, when he basically conquered all the neighboring nations, that was recorded in the history books of these other nations as well. So when Cambyses is here going to check these records, yeah, they'll find out that, hey, during this time period, yep, the Israelites did this. Yep, they did that. Yep, they did this. Yep, they did that. And that's what these people wanted them to do. Verse 23, and that the Jews were rebellious and raised always wars therein, for the which cause even this city was made desolate. Which, I mean, when you go into the history, that was the case, right? Zedekiah, instead of obeying what Nebuchadnezzar said, rebelled. And after being made puppet king, he rebelled, and then that didn't end too well for him. Verse 24, wherefore now we do declare unto thee, O Lord the King, that if this city be built again, and the walls thereof set up anew, thou shalt from henceforth have no passage into Seleucia and Phoenice. Then the king wrote back again to Rathimus, the story writer, to Beeltethmus, to Similius, the scribe, and to the rest that were in commission, and dwellers in Samaria and Syria and Phoenice, after this manner. I have read the epistle which ye have sent unto me. Therefore I have commanded to make diligent search, and it hath been found that the city was from the beginning practicing against kings, and the men therein were given to rebellion and war, and that many kings, or mighty kings and fierce, were in Jerusalem. So he read the history about, the different kings of Israel and what they did, who reigned and exacted tribute in Seleucia and Phoenice. Now therefore I have commanded to hinder those men from building the city, and heed be taken that there be no more done in it. So At the time of Cyrus, we were allowed to go back and start rebuilding. As we were doing that, Cyrus, time is going on. Cyrus dies, his son comes into power. There's a report that's made against us, and so his son, Cambyses, gives an order to basically halt the building. So now we couldn't continue building the temple. And what did that lead to? Eventually, you had Israelites that came back to Babylon and said, all right, well, I guess, we'll see what happens. Verse 29, and that those wicked workers proceed no further to the annoyance of kings. Then King Artaxerxes, his letters being read, Rathamus and Semelius the scribe, and the rest that were in commission with them, removing in haste towards Jerusalem with a troop of horsemen and a multitude of people in battle array, began to hinder the builders, and the building of the temple ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, the king of the Persians. So they were looking for permission to be able to come and stop us from building, and they got that, and so they went and did that. And that brings us to the end of 1 Esdras, the 2nd chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rachak Kodash, and until next time, Shalom.